Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm very excited that you're able to join us today. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with Polco. I'm really excited about today's panel because we've got an excellent group of leaders that are going to be sharing their perspectives on how to maintain a sense of community in a socially distanced world. We're going to be just sharing ideas and ways that these leaders have been dealing with the challenge of connecting with residents on things that are important to them, so that residents feel like they're being heard and they feel part of the community. We just find that it's a really helpful way to get perspectives from community leaders and then to share these ideas with others. So the intent of a panel conversation is really just to hear how these leaders have been dealing with these challenges that effectively affect every community in the country. And we wanted to just be able to share ideas so that you gain a new idea, a new perspective, something that you can use in your own communities as you try to move your communities forward. Here's the format of today's discussion, just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. We'll take a few minutes to introduce each of the panelists and then allow them to introduce themselves a little bit. I'll kick off the conversation, asking questions that draw out how communities are continuing to get their residents' input on important community issues, and why that is a critical element of maintaining a sense of community. And then we'll provide an opportunity for the panelists to ask each other questions if there are any that come up. I'm looking forward to a great conversation, and just want to thank all the panelists for being part of the conversation today. So let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Michael Penny. Michael is a recognized leader in our profession. He currently is the city manager in Castle Pines, Colorado, and has served large and small communities in Colorado for more than 2 decades. Michael's leadership, commitment to excellence, and collaborative management approach has allowed him to be part of building strong and robust communities wherever he's been. Michael's been also very active with ICMA over the years, and recognizes that leadership in local government is more about what you give than what you receive, which is one of the reasons why these panels are so important and what they're all about. So Michael, thank you for being with us today. And if you would, I would love it if you would just share a little bit more about yourself.
First of all, thanks for having me, Matt. It's a pleasure to be amongst this group and being able to participate in this conversation. So very quickly, the majority of my experience outside of college is in Colorado. So I do have there's a limited perspective as I comment on any questions in our discussion today. But I have worked, I grew up in Boulder, worked for the city of Boulder, which is a fairly liberal community, although I do call it the most conservative liberal community I've ever met, because their code book is about a half a foot thick because they regulate everything. They're just known for saving prairie dogs, et cetera, out in the larger realm. Went to Ouray, which is a very small community. But that's where I was the manager in my first position. Great community, very small community, very educated community based on tourism. And so very unique in a lot of respects in terms of where it's located in the southwest part of Colorado, very much focused on how they want to handle issues. So that was a very different dynamic than coming from Boulder, where people wanted to really engage and learn best management practices. This was an organization and community that at the time was very much, we can figure it out, we know how to handle it. So the role of the manager changes. From there, went to Frisco, Colorado, again, a tourist-based economy, very liberal as tourism is, and ski resorts around that area. Very socially focused, lots of affordable housing projects, lots of free transit, those kind of things. Went to Littleton, Colorado, a much larger community, about 45,000 people. I should say Colorado is still made up of small communities. Our total population's under 6 million. So Denver and Colorado Springs are our largest community. So for us, being in a 45,000 community is definitely on the upper end for what Colorado has. About 225 plus of our 272 municipalities are well under 10,000 population. So we have a lot of small communities. Was in Littleton for a while. Again, changing dynamics, it was more of a conservative community, kind of status quo. Was there for about 5 years and am now in Castle Pines, which is a very conservative community and county, Douglas County, one of the fastest growing in the nation, and also, again, very conservative in that front. In total, I'm coming up on about 30 years in maybe even more in local government. Used to have hair, used to not be gray what was left. So probably longer than I planned on going, but it's a pleasure to join this esteemed group. And again, thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you being here, just how well recognized you are in the industry. Our second panelist is Patula Burks, who currently serves as the Chief of Staff for the Mayor of Augusta, Georgia. Often called the Fixer, Petula is an award-winning and skilled PR and crisis communication professional with over 20 years of experience in state and local government. I have to say, Petula's resume is very impressive and very extensive. Throughout her professional journey, she's provided organizational leadership and managerial finesse in the jurisdictions where she served. Because of all of her skills, she's also worked with clients across the country with political campaigns, video production, and market outreach. Petula is the author of several blog spots and articles, a sought-after speaker, presenter, and host, and is a mentor to other up-and-coming professionals. One of the things that was really impressive, Petula, was when I read about your selection, your multiple selections. One is Broward County's 40 under 40 most influential African Americans by Legacy Magazine, a Woman of the Year by the National Association of Professional Women, and selected as one of Miami-Dade County's 50 most powerful leaders by MIA Magazine. And then you were recently named onto the 2019 Who's Who list. Petula, that's just a wonderful resume, and I would love to hear what else you'd like to add to your resume.
So it's funny. Thanks. I'm really excited to be here and to be sort of discussing all the things that we all do. Every time I hear 20 years, I'm like, oh gosh, I've gotten to be that person. And now in the city of Augusta, I'm actually senior staff. And so when we talk about experience, I started literally with the Georgia Department of Transportation some many years ago. Just as a PR, whatever they used to call us, right? Because you go through all of these various transitions in communications. And from there, I went to the office of Dennis Moss down in Miami-Dade County. He was one of the county commissioners as his public affairs director. I think I was like 24 years old. I have seen the city of Fort Lauderdale. I spent about 9 years there in the communications office doing public relations and communications. And looking at, in some ways, underserved communities within the city itself. We had a CRA that's still kicking and going strong there, but they were not getting sort of the looks that they needed. And so that was really important to me to make sure that whatever we were doing for one part of the city, all parts of the city got the same type of representation. From Fort Lauderdale, I went down to Miami Gardens, so not that far, a city that is relatively young. About 17 years old, and was their public affairs director for 2 years. Left there, went all the way out west. So I went from like one corner to the other because I went to Washington State Department of Health, and then left there and went to Sacramento to work in economic development for the EDO out there, and then did a second stint in Miami Gardens, and then returned to my home state. I'm from Athens, Georgia, so literally it's nice to be about an hour and a half from my mom. I'm here in Augusta. Working for Mayor Hardy Davis. This is an interesting city. It is the second largest city in the state of Georgia. And I think what's very interesting about being here is there's so many things that people don't know. So we are literally the cyber capital of the nation. The United States Army just moved their whole entire cyber center here. On top of, we just built an innovation cyber center about 2 years ago. So we're doing all things innovation, all things cyber. And I'm really excited about what that looks like for the next 2 years. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really excited to be here with Michael and Danny and interested in learning as well. So thank you, Matt.
That's great. Thanks so much for being here. Let me introduce Danny Langlass. Danny is the city manager in Dixon, Illinois, and has been for the last several years, but he's been with the city for over 24 years. Danny comes out of the public safety world. He served 21 years in the police department, the last 10 of which were as police chief. So he brings a wide array of a skill set and leadership skills to his position and to this panel. In addition to the service that he provides to the city, Danny's a dynamic leadership speaker and coach, specializing in helping organizations build high performance environments. As you might expect, Danny's leadership over the course of the years has been tested by the most difficult situations. In addition, of course, to dealing with the global pandemic, he's provided leadership and helped lead the community through many significant civil and public safety crises. Throughout those experiences, Danny's had a direct role in creating great teams across many leadership roles in this organization, and not only at the local level, but he's also done the same thing at within the community groups, as well as at the state level. Danny's currently the host of the Leadership Excellence podcast. So Danny, thank you very much for being here, and would love to hear a little bit more from your perspective.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to represent the city of Dixon. There's no place I'd rather live. A few things about Dixon. So Dixon's about 90 miles due west of Chicago on I-88. We're a town of 16,000, and there's several towns around us in what they call the Sauk Valley area with similar populations. It's kind of a perfect rural community with an urban feel. We're really known for our arts and culture. We've got a very vibrant downtown, an incredible riverfront that we're in the process of expanding. One of our biggest claims to fame is being the boyhood home of President Ronald Reagan. And so he had come back several times, including during his presidency, to share some things, to visit the community, and the community always remained near and dear to his heart. I kind of have a different transition into government as far as city management goes. And it's something we're starting to see a lot more in the field, where police chiefs who have come up through the ranks of organizations are making transitions into city manager, city administrator type of positions. So just a little bit more about me and our community. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Danny. It's really nice to have you as part of this group. So the topic today is sharing a sense of community in a socially distanced world. As you know, I mean, COVID-19 has totally disrupted any sense of normalcy in our communities. And just kind of given this unsettled environment, it just seems to be more important than ever to think about how do we help residents stay connected to the community and just maintain that sense of community, which I know we all want to sustain and build upon. But given how much disturbance has happened in our worlds, how do you do that in a successful way? You need to have that authentic connection, and you need to be creative in how you connect with residents, given the remote nature of our world. Pandemic presents a lot of challenges in maintaining a sense of community, and today's intent, the program's intent today is really to just kind of explore what communities are doing to address that challenge. Maybe one way to start out on thinking about this problem is just taking a look at the problem. I think in the best of times, I can remember during my 30 years of being a city manager, engagement was always a challenge. It used to drive me crazy to go to meetings where you had more staff than residents when you were dealing with particularly important issues. And through our research, we've actually learned that over 80% of American adults have never even been to a council meeting. And so in the best of times, engagement was always a challenge. But then you throw on top of that a pandemic where everybody is now operating in a socially distanced environment. Everybody's working remotely. It's impacted not only our residents, but also the way that the communities operate in their remote aspects. And so communities have had to deal not only internally with their organizational change, but also try to deal with the needs and expectations of residents in the community. So the pandemic has created all sorts of interesting challenges on how do you maintain that connection to local decision makers, and just making sure that you feel like your voice is being heard, and that you feel like you're part of a community. And so that's what we're interested in learning about today. We're going to be exploring 3 questions. Here are the questions. The first one is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? The second is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And then finally, which tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? So let's just kind of jump into them with the first question. And Michael, let's start with you. Okay. How has Castle Pines' communication and engagement strategy evolved since the start of the pandemic?
So first, I think all these three questions are great, and as Petula said, I would very much look forward to learning from what others do. I should qualify my answers, and you'll understand why I'm qualifying it. In Colorado, municipalities don't, except for probably Denver, the larger ones, Denver, Aurora, and Colorado Springs, really don't deal with human services, social services issues. So one thing that I think the pandemic has done is really had us break out of our normal environment of what we're legally responsible for, because I think a lot of what these questions get to is about human beings individually and the fact that we're social animals, and that disconnect that you have within the community, in some areas of the community where those people are feeling lost, they're feeling alone, they're scared, they lost their job, whatever that environment is for them. It's how do you, as a local government that doesn't normally deal in those issues, how do you not say that's not my responsibility, but actually start to engage and learn very quickly about how to ensure that those people get the support that they need and do feel engaged. And that's a microcosm of the total of the question. But just again, that clarification, at least for Colorado, because I realize on a national level, roles and responsibilities are different across state lines. For us, similar to probably everyone watching this, and certainly on the panel, we very quickly moved to virtual meetings. And interestingly for us, really out of the gate of those virtual meetings, we had a fairly controversial issue, and we were accused of not being transparent and kind of approving these things under the rug, if you will, while everybody was locked down at home with COVID or during COVID. But at the same time, what was happening was, because we were virtual, and I'll be interested again to see what others say, the number of people who participated in our meetings went up substantially. Now that might be from 2 people to 8 people, but on a percentage basis, that's huge, because normally we're a community of about 12,000 people. I probably should have opened with that. So to have 2 or 3 people at a council meeting, we had the pom-poms out and we were super excited. But then if we could get 10 or 20 people virtually, we still didn't see a huge increase in the number of people who wanted to speak. But in watching the people who had logged on to the meeting, most of them would stay statistically over the last 7 months or so. Most of them stay really till the end of the meeting. And so from from an engagement standpoint, we see that as a positive, in the sense that there are more people now watching what's happening at the city council, understanding what those issues are, and having that opportunity to communicate. So obviously that was probably for us the biggest thing, was just the shift in our public meetings going virtual, allowing more people to easily engage. And I should say that the accusations of doing things under the rug quickly fell by the wayside, as people realized that in reality, being locked at home with them sitting on their whatever tool you happen to use to look at the internet, it was super easy just to click on this council meeting. So if anything, more people were aware of what council was doing, not fewer. But it was just kind of ironic, at least to me. Other things that we've done, several council members, including our mayor, I think have increased the number of outreach meetings that they've done, just in terms of them individually. So we have our mayor, her name is Tara Radloff. So she has Tuesdays with Tara, Thursdays with Tara, tries to fluctuate the time. But overall, we're seeing more communication in the virtual realm, allowing people to create feedback and interact with our elected officials and staff, obviously, as well. The other thing we're really cognizant of here is that, at least our belief and approach is that it is not government's responsibility, or nor should it necessarily be, that we are creating the true sense of community in that fashion. And that is probably something that you could delve into deeper. But ultimately, we want to ensure, as I opened with, that if there are people who aren't feeling connected or have needs in whatever fashion, that we provide an opportunity, A, to know about it, and then B, to do something about it. And so we've got, like everyone, I assume, next door is a huge social media, along with Facebook and Instagram and whatever else is out there. And really what we've seen in our community is those platforms, not a government platform, but those private sector platforms have really become the place where people are communicating with each other in all the positive and negative, and mainly negative, obviously, during the election process, all the rhetoric that goes around that. But there's also a lot of, hey, can somebody help me with this, or my power went out, and seems to really have built more localized sense of community. And it's a lot of who's on the block that they may not have known before, and they see that name and then, oh, I'm going to go pick something up because you've got that proverbial gallon of milk or that cup of sugar, and I'm going to help out my neighbor. So less related to the government, but more just the natural coming together that the citizens are doing on their own, utilizing these social medias, is something that we've seen a lot of. And then obviously we push out our information over those social medias. But like Matt was opening with, nobody solved this engagement issue over the last 30 years. I don't think we truly ever will. We are not successful and haven't been successful at bringing people onto our social platform. So we've been spending some time in the last month or two trying to figure out, how do we engage with the citizens on the various platforms that they choose to be engaged in? And how do we do that in a positive way, given the mass amount of negative posts that statistically are out there versus kind of the positive ones. But the summary to your question, I think, is we are continuing to learn about how the internet and social softwares and social platforms are changing how we communicate. And the other thing we're doing is, and then I'll end here so I don't take up all the time, is we're trying to do more virtual events where people can see each other on multiple screens so that they have that sense of community. During the summertime, we were able to have more outdoor events. We're now doing like the Grinch on Christmas, where everybody can see each other. We had people come and pick up little Grinch bags. And then the actual event is virtual in there. So to the extent that we can bring people together, even in that virtual environment, because our core belief is we are, as human beings, we need to have that human interaction and connection with each other. And to the extent that the government can assist in that facilitation and make that happen, that's been our primary focus. Thanks, Matt.
I think that's really helpful. I love the fact that you brought up the human aspect of it. Does Castle Rock have a pretty active civic organization around town?
We do not really overall. We were started as a bedroom community in the county, and then we incorporated. We're the newest city in the state of Colorado. We incorporated about 12 years ago. So it's kind of interesting, that question, because our internal local motto from the municipality is we are creating the community of Castle Pines. And it's not coming from the place of ego saying we know what the community is. It's the fact that we don't have that sense of community. What people have is their individual subdivisions or their cul-de-sac that they consider their community. When I got here, people introduced themselves from what HOA they were from.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody actually said I'm from the city of Castle Pines. So our goal and focus is to get people to see the value of the community as a whole and all people within that community, so that they start to say, hi, I'm Michael Penny, I'm from the city of Castle Pines, not I'm from HOA X, Y, and Z. Gotcha. And so there's these pockets, but nothing kind of on the community level. The other thing is we're about half built out, and we're just exploding on an entire different side of an eight lane highway, which for a lot of people, they don't even realize or understand or comprehend, or the paradigm shift hasn't happened, that's part of their community. Oh. I think they see it as another community. Yeah. And so we've really been working on this cohesion, making sure that we don't create us and thems and all the dynamics that this group is keenly aware of.
Yeah, great perspective. Yeah, thank you. Petula, let's pose the same question to you. Could you share how your communication and engagement strategy has evolved in Augusta since the beginning of the pandemic?
Well, I'm going to sort of bounce back and forth because I've been in Augusta since September. And so I'll use some of my previous experience as well to sort of talk about how we did some things in my previous life as well. Because before I got to Augusta, my other city that I was with, we were very involved in Facebook and those types of things. And more so probably from a leadership perspective than a city perspective. And so what the pandemic did was really make us ramp up our social media. How do we reach out to all of our various organizations that are within the community? The population was more senior based. A lot of, retirees, folks who've been in the city before it was the city, own their own homes, those types of folks, and a working class population. And so really trying to figure out how do we now engage them in all the things that we had going on. We had a robust parks and recs program. So we had, fitness and, swimming and you name it, we did it. We had started Haitian Creole classes and Spanish classes and like literally everything that you could possibly think of, we were doing on our parks to make sure that folks had things to do. Our seniors came into the parks like 3 times a week. So they knew what they were going to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They knew they were going to see their friends. And so how do you augment that was sort of the conversation. And so we started doing literally everything that we could do virtually. So we did, virtual aerobics, we did yoga, we did nutrition and cooking classes. And then when we could bring in folks, while we couldn't be in the same room, you might see, the nutritionist and the chef on one screen and maybe the mayor on the other, and they were interacting. And then you would see the interactions coming up on the feed. So people wanted to engage however they could because that was the way they could touch folks. Much like Michael, most cities aren't really into sort of the human and health services pieces. But one of the things that we did find was, how do we make sure that our residents are good when they're going through the pandemic? They're, losing jobs or they are homeschooling all of a sudden and they're teachers and now it's 3 meals a day as opposed to 1. How do we help sustain our businesses? And so some of that engagement was really sitting down and talking with them. How can we help you? And so, when you started talking about business relief, a lot of our businesses were small, family-owned restaurants. So we engaged with them to say, well, we want to make sure that our families have meals. So how do we figure out an interesting way to deal with funding to make sure that you can provide the meals? What do we need to do from the city side? And then where do we sort of give the meals away? So we did meals for families, I want to say almost 4 or 5 months until like the end of school. And then we partnered with the stadium that was in the city. They then became sort of our meal person. And they were like, we just need to know who within your community. Well, there were pockets of organizations. So we had a grandparents organization who unfortunately through the pandemic saw an increase of grandchildren living with them. So you might go from, 2 people to 5 people to 7 people in your home. And they were like, we can't sustain this. So being able to make sure that they had the right connections to get food throughout the week, right? So it's little things like that we made sure we were doing as well. And then it was, sometimes it's just you pick up the phone and it's just the old school type of engagement with your residents. The residents have your cell phone numbers, so they know how to text, they know how to call. And it's just having those conversations, telling them how they can avail themselves of the government. Because once City Hall closed down, they didn't know what to do or how they were going to get things done. And then, of course, like everybody else, we moved all of our meetings to YouTube and virtual and Zoom and X, Y, and Z. But for those people who are not, digitally savvy or have access, how do we maintain that? We started a community newspaper that we pushed out. It was all of those little things and little touches. So it was the digital touches, but then it was still sort of keeping the human touch as well, where you knew people needed it. And then learning how to access your community members' networks, right? So the ARPs, the grandparents, the PTAs, the homeowners association, how do we make those connections? So one, they're connected, but we're also connected with them. What we saw was an increase in one, commission meetings, folks watching and participating, but also an increase in folks doing, yoga online. People were waiting for our Spanish classes and our Creole classes and wanted other things to do. So when I look at sort of where we are here in Augusta, it's very similar. Everything is online. We just started doing COVID conversations with the mayor this past Monday and looking at specific communities of color and what that looks like and having real authentic conversations, because at the end of the day, whether you're in person or you are across the computer from someone, they want to feel like you're going to be honest with them, that you're going to engage with them in a way that appreciates where they are. And you're going to inform them and educate and encourage and empower them, but not tell them, what to do, but give them enough information for them to make an informed decision. And so I think those are some of the things that we continue to balance as we move through this. And I think it's something that we will continue to learn as we get into 2021, because I'm not sure that we're going to change back to what our normal was anymore.
That may be a question we want to ask a little bit later. I'm kind of curious. I love the term little touches, because that does describe a lot of ways. In fact, it follows up on what Michael was saying. It's just the way that the simple things of connecting with people on a human level. If you were to recommend one way that has been successful for you to have successful outreach with, say, the elderly group, what would you recommend communities consider?
One, you got to know your seniors. So, and you have to sort of know who those leaders are within the senior groups, because then literally now I've been gone from Miami, months now, and I still get those calls and the text messages. And now it's just checking in on me because I checked in on them. And so what you have to do sometimes is you go and knock on the door, or you go and you call and you say, hey, are you good? Do you need anything? It's just those things. Sometimes we forget because we get so busy in all of the work that we're doing and all the projects we're trying to push out that, those are the folks that built these communities. And sometimes their family, especially now, can't get to them. So we become sort of that family for them. So if I can send a text message just to say, hey, are you good? Do you need anything? Oh, by the way, I would let an elected know, oh, did you know Miss So-and-so had surgery? Do you want to send anything? It's those things, because they are those folks that are coming to commission meetings in person. Those are the folks that are calling you, hey, I need some help with this. And now all of a sudden, they don't have that anymore. So how do we continue to do that? So it's always making sure you got to know people personally. And, it's hard when it's a large city. That was 113,000 people. And to try to get to know everybody is really hard. But you got to know those key members that are influencers for you, because those are the folks that then, touch the other people and will let the other people in their group know. So they become family. You make them family. They're not just your constituent or your resident.
That is so helpful. Thank you. Danny, how has Dixon's communication and engagement strategy changed since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, this is something, Matt, that we've been out in front of for a long time. As the police chief, there's nothing more important than having strong relationships with your community. So we had started a Facebook page with the police department years ago, and intentionally we're telling our story, right? We've got Facebook. Our Twitter page is actually Twitter famous, has gotten views of over 1 million on several things we put out. And the way we're connecting is human beings. And so now we're expanding into a YouTube page. Well, when I became the city manager a few years ago, we had a very big priority as we sat down with our team on this Tell Your Story campaign. And the city's Facebook page has now grown to the levels of the police department's page. And we've got to be intentional about telling our story and establishing these connections with our residents, because, they're our bosses. Their taxes pay our salaries, right? And if they don't know what's going on, they don't have any idea what's going on. And when people, unfortunately with human beings, we always go to the negative. Nothing's happening. Where are my taxes going? So we're proactively showing people what's happening, with their tax dollars. We did a record street resurfacing project this year, and there's tons of posts through our social media showing different stages, giving different information, pushing different things out. And it's important, just like with strategic partners and relationships, you don't wait to create a great team and framework for crisis. You create those things in advance, because now we have an engaged group of residents when COVID hit. So a couple things changed about our strategy. So as everything was being announced, so we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, there were all these conflicting messages from the federal government and the state government, and depending on if you were a Republican or a Democrat, right? And so we called a meeting locally, and we created a unified command team. And that consisted of our health department administrator, our hospital CEO, and some of their key executives. It consisted of, our police leadership, our fire leadership. Okay, it consisted of mental health people. It consisted at times of our school district. It consisted of our local Dixon Chamber of Commerce and Main Street. We have a very connected community, and they're a main hub. The state's attorney's office, right, is we're processing this through emergency management. And so we got a good framework around what's real. What do we know from experts? And then we decided we were going to become the trusted source of information related to COVID. And every day for 3 months, between 5 and 7 p.m., we issued a long form release with key information across not just our social media site, but coordinated across all social media sites that went out to our local media as well. So every day, our community was getting information and getting informed. With this engagement strategy and keeping them informed, this became very, very popular. We're a town of 16,000. We're reaching over 10,000 people, right, a post in a town of 16,000. And some of those people are in some of the rural areas. Some of those people are from away. Well, you start to feel the community. We're all struggling. And our message is, hey, you're us and we're you, right? And so we put together these leadership videos where we brought in a key city council member, we brought in the school superintendent, the health department administrator, the CEO of KSB, a local state representative, myself, and a few others. And we scripted out the message, a message of emotional empathy and connection, a message of hope and optimism, a message of what the facts are, a call to action to our community to come together and unite during these hard times, to support each other, to support their businesses, to check in on elderly people. And I'll tell you, when you look at surrounding communities, still today, our voluntary compliance with the mitigation factors that are in are near 100%. And there is zero enforcement, zero threat of enforcement. But leaders stepped up and led. And when you look at neighboring communities and the death tolls in those communities and their infection rates, they're much, much higher. Places have stayed open. So we said, okay, people are responding to that. So we've got our community outreach and engagement. Now we need to be specific and targeted about our businesses, especially our small businesses, non-chain businesses. And so we did a ton of research. We brought in our economic development group, our Dixon Chamber of Commerce and Main Street, our finance director, our grants administrator. We sat around key business stakeholders and said, what is out there? And our state rolled out this really aggressive program that every business had to be a separate application, and every application was like 100 pages. And so we put together this team. So within 3 days of this grant rolling out, we had 70 plus business owners on a Zoom call virtually, explaining what they needed, explaining what we were going to do. We went through that process. We filed these grants, worked on them, pushed them through. I mean, these are like what it took to do these grants were like major infrastructure project grants. There was no difference between that and the $1 Million Opportunity Zone grant we just won. When some things started falling short on our state side and they didn't deliver on some of the promises, we said, what else can we do? We tightened our budget. We froze capital purchases. We said, we're trying to grow and expand and add new businesses and make our downtown as the hub more solid than ever. We can't lose a single business. And so we took money that we were going to buy squad cars with and that we were going to do other things with in our freeze. And we invested that back in businesses. And we ran an initial program to where we gave our small businesses that qualified 2 months of rent, paid all their utilities. right? We had another hub that had all the information about all the grants, the PPP, the state stuff, all those things. So they had a central location to go to, and then we help with that. And then as we transitioned, we looked at, Petula has talked about this. How we don't run the park district as in our city, it's separate, but we work with the park district. We work with the Y and Chamber of Commerce and Main Street. And instead of all these events we were having, next thing you know, we had Friday night musical Zoom where they were getting artists that were pretty good, and they were coming on and having this musical Zoom. And then the other thing we looked to implement was a volunteer program to where we know there's just a lot of people, and Petula mentioned on this too, that are older, that are maybe disconnected, their family isn't here, that we know are struggling. Isolation is a horrible, horrible thing that's come from this pandemic. And so we started to have people that were just willing to reach out to see how somebody was doing, to have that human to human interaction, and then to really promote through our messaging about the fact of sons and daughters, cousins, nieces and nephews, to reach out to grandma or grandpa, or to identify, okay, specifically be intentional about who in our family lives alone. In our case, my mom lives alone, all right? And let's be intentional for sure about reaching out to them, because that's really a difficult thing. So we've taken a very proactive approach. We've capitalized on the huge following that we've had on our social media that we've created. We've used a synergy to make sure that consistent and the same messaging is going out across numerous organizations. And because of that, we've had a lot of success. And in a time of COVID, where everybody's hanging on, we're still moving forward, and that's a big part with our community and the community spirit.
Yeah, I love the strategic leadership, Danny, that you're talking about. And what also resonates really well with me, and I think doesn't get promoted enough, is just appreciating the proactive nature of getting ahead of the game. Don't wait for a crisis to happen for you to start engaging. Really build those systems up. And it sounds like you have done a great job in Dixon in being proactive on building those networks. What's been your participation levels now that you've been working more remotely?
Yeah, so we're pushing our meetings out on Zoom and Facebook Live. And, generally, and, Michael, I hear you. A lot of times the only people in the audience at a live meeting is the staff. And we've had up to over 300 people now come in on our meetings. Wow. But what you see, and you got to be careful about paying attention to those numbers, because normally it's 45 or 50. But because our social media feed, people go to it all the time, right? People can watch that back. It's there forever. Yeah. And so your views and people reached ends up in the thousands. Yep. And so people can go back, and we get comments from people that say, I wasn't able to go on, but I went back. And then we put a thing in the feed at the beginning that if you want to make a public comment or ask a question for the meeting, do it within this feed. And so people got to reply to that to come on public record, because otherwise people are just kind of chatting, and we don't want to decipher what's intended to be a public comment and what isn't intended to be a public comment. And we've had pretty good engagement. We've had pretty good engagement from that. So being proactive, and I want to challenge people out there watching this, because this is for government, to really look beyond the idea of we're here for just very basic purposes, because we've got to fulfill those, right? But we've got this motto we talk about in Vision: the best way to predict the future is to create it. And we don't do that alone. We're driving a ton of community engagement. We got this Dixon Strong leadership team we'd had put together before that is incredibly diverse and representative of not only gender, but race within our community and age, that have different feeds out there. And then we can draw that in. And then we've run several community engagement surveys through our social network platforms that have had high responses, over 2,000 responses per engagement. And so we've got to be visioning for that future. And we've really got to be a lot more proactive in our leadership and our strategic partnerships and sharing our vision and really engaging and getting feedback so we continue to move forward. We've got to eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy and the red tape, and we've got to focus much more strategically on leadership, right? And those four components of vision, culture, strategy, execution. And unfortunately, I think we get a lot more locked in maybe to strategy and execution and forget about vision and culture. And that's a big problem that I see.
Okay. Very cool. Thank you. Let's move on to the second question. And Petula, we'll start with you on this question. How do you think engagement influences how successful Augusta is in maintaining its sense of community?
I mean, right now it's everything, right? And again, sort of being new here, you kind of see it from sort of a different perspective. Coming into a city that's 203,000 people, but being able to sort of feel like it's a hometown, it makes you understand that we've done something right. People feel like they can reach out. They literally they call the mayor directly. There's not been those barriers, I think, that sometimes people sort of seem to have when it comes to government. A lot of times they don't know how to access, or they don't know how. And I think Augusta has done a good job in just sort of saying, you know what, this is the welcome mat, please come in. And so when you go into a crisis like COVID, that we don't know how long it's going to last, but you've already said you're welcome, it makes it easier when you transition. Residents know who they can call. When I listened to like my very first commission meeting here, you recognize that the commissioners here are very embedded in their communities. People feel it's easy. I can walk down the street and talk to them. I see them at dinner. I go to church with them. And so that makes the communication and engagement side, from the larger perspective from the city side, a lot easier, because there's an expectation that you're going to engage. And if you do it right, they're going to come back to you and engage back to you. Do we always get it right? No. But our residents here have ownership of what goes on in the city. So, you've got folks that come to commission meeting, and even now, what we call delegation, and what most people call sort of the public comment time period for commission meetings, they'll still come to the commission chamber, even though we're not meeting in chamber, so that they can be heard. It's those things. It's just the familiar touches. Again, that's the big thing for me, is those little touches mean so much to people. We will take a meeting in person if we have to. But at the end of the day, it is really important they feel like their voices are heard. And however that looks and feels for them, again, 2 months in, and I have people now calling me at, after hours, or texting me. I had a long conversation last night with someone about something that came up, and they didn't like the result of it. And we literally had probably a 30-minute conversation, but we resolved sort of what their consternation was in that call to go to the next steps, right? That's what it's about. They've got to feel like, especially now, and I say especially now because we're going to be this for a while. And so if they can't reach out and touch you, through text messages, calls, FaceTime, I've got folks that FaceTime. I'm like, I really don't want you to see me on video right now, but okay, we'll try this. But it's always sort of being available. I always say, in all of my previous positions, and including this one, it's 24/7. So, and it's 365. And that availability has to be real. And fortunately and unfortunately for me, I live that. So if you call me at 1 o'clock in the morning, if I hear my phone, I'm going to answer it. Because that is really what we're supposed to do. And when they know that you're accessible, it makes life easier. So when we have to make those harder decisions, much like Danny's talking about, it makes it easier for them to accept them as well, because you've already engaged them up front, and you brought them in and they're participating. And the more that they can participate and know that you hear them, the more it just makes life easier on the flip side of things. So.
That's great. I love your discussion, because it's something that everybody has said today, and that is really about how your leadership has stepped up. And you introduced the term honesty. I kind of use the term authentic, and
right.
it strikes me that in all of the panelist communities, that authentic leadership is something that has really helped. It maybe is a little thing, but it's a really important thing.
It's everything. At some point, it's everything, because if your residents, if your constituency, they don't have the trust in you, who are you talking to?
Right.
And who's listening?
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Danny, how has How does engagement play into your success in maintaining a sense of community in Dixon?
So I think that the engagement and the community trust, right, that we're building and the brand of our community is what legitimizes everything it is that we do. We have the authority that we have to be able to do certain things for the citizens because that's been given to us essentially by the citizens, right? And so if we don't have that, we're really not a legitimate form of government. It's incredibly important. We've got to understand, and I love Petula talking about all the touch points and the little things matter, right? The little things are what matter the most. And we've got to be very proactive in our communication. We live here, right? We can anticipate what's happening. We can anticipate the questions people have, and we need to proactively communicate. And when we do that, and especially if there's change, we've got to start with why. We've got to explain that reason. And if we do things and we shape and frame things in the right way, then we don't have the big issues in the big problems. We've got to understand now, and it's very evident that as a society, we're just so much more unstable, right? There's very low levels of psychological safety. Our lives have been turned upside down. There's tons of fear, doubt, and uncertainty. So by us stepping up, right, and taking that lead and demonstrating leadership during these times, that begins in being the trusted source of information, proactively communicating, answering questions as they come up, being proactive in that starts to take away uncertainty. That starts to take away doubt, right? That starts to diminish fear when they see their leaders, everybody working together and messaging together. The other thing that's important about it, because this has happened to us, right? We're not perfect. And I think, being willing to step up and say, hey, we made a mistake here, right? This wasn't our intention. We made this mistake. We're making it right. The importance about telling our story and doing this often and getting out in front of it is because when we make deposits as government, those deposits are small and they're short lasting. But when we make a withdrawal, it's huge. And so we've got to make sure there's a lot of deposits in our account because the withdrawals are always bigger than the deposits. And when we start thinking about it in that way, we can become very intentional. And we care about our people. We're concerned about them. We're concerned about our businesses. And the fact that we do care and our community knows that we have their back and everybody is working together, it really legitimizes the government. I would caution people not to get discouraged by some of the negativity that comes on the posts because there's going to be negativity. Michael talked about that earlier. But if you look at our posts and maybe you see 50 negative messages out of 200. Of those 50 negative messages, they've come from 4 people. If 50 negative messages have come from 50 people, then we need to really ask ourselves some deeper questions, right? But we need to stay positive. And the one thing that you love is a lot of the positive people hit the like button, maybe say good job, but they don't say a lot because they don't want to be the ones that are attacked by the vultures inside of social media. But there was a time over the summer where some things happened and some statements were taken the wrong way, that we put something out and just a narrative. And it was kind of long. Like, will people read this? And there were 300 plus positive comments about how much our community appreciated the leadership and the teamwork and the information. So we don't always hear it. And as leaders, we shouldn't expect it, but we've got to know and trust when we're doing the right things, it's making that difference. And it legitimizes the government and our service to our community.
Sounds like you got just a great culture going, and I'm sure that it's related to the strategic and proactive leadership that you're sharing. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Michael, how has engagement influenced Castle Pines' sense in maintaining its sense of community?
So let me just say first, what Petula and Danny are saying is what I love about local government. I mean, I can't imagine working in county, state, or federal level, and a lot of it has to do with what my colleagues on this panel are speaking to. It's that human connection. I use the word intentional all the time, and we aim, as Petula said, to be authentic. It really is a statement of ditto, Matt, more than anything else. But some of the things that I didn't speak to in the first question that Danny spoke to right out of the gate, we did a similar thing in terms of we modified our website. We had our business connection COVID page. We had our citizen page, pushed all that out over social media so that people knew where they could go. And we know that people are sitting in front of their televisions, they're watching their favorite news channel. As everyone has said, it's a huge amount of confliction depending upon what news channel you're watching. And so and then of course you have the state, and then you've got, what our state health department's putting out, their different programs that were coming out, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did was similar to what has already been communicated, is we tried to simplify it. We tried to we became that go-to place for citizens or businesses to get kind of the straightforward answers. So we read all the documents, we interpreted it, we made the phone calls to our health department or to the state to say, well, what does this mean? When it says they have to provide a business plan, is that a back of napkin or is that a 200-page thesis? And so we did that interpretation, pushed it out over our website. And we really did that up until the point where people kind of knew what the rules were. We knew we had to wear masks, wash our hands, stay 6 feet away. And we kind of reached that normal. And it was about that time that I spoke to in the first question, that we really tried to do more of those virtual events, try to get people out, make that connection. But ultimately, I think we've been successful to the extent that we have seen our community members support our businesses. Our sales tax have gone up, and not just on the internet taxes, but in our brick and mortars. We've not seen any businesses close, and we take some credit for that in the sense that the communication early on was, we are a community. We need to continue to support each other. That's neighbor to neighbor. It's human to human, but it's also, support your local businesses like many municipalities have done, push that shop local. You can, even though they're closed for indoor dining, that's still your favorite restaurant, go get it to go. And so for us, a level of success certainly came from seeing that the engagement that our community had with the local businesses and maintaining their viability during this time. And obviously there's federal dollars that flowed in, and there's local grant dollars as well. But I think that is certainly one definition of success. Seeing, as you've heard from both the other panelists, the increased engagement virtually, I think, is another definition of success. And Petula spoke to this in great detail, but that reaching out on that individual level, our mayor walks around, she talks to the businesses, people call her directly as well. They certainly call other council members as well. We've got, each, as I spoke to, we're very neighborhood focused. So our council members are out in their neighborhoods, and those human connections, I mean, that local government love that I spoke of a moment ago, that comes because we have that opportunity to get that 1 a.m. phone call that we can talk for 30 minutes, and we can visualize where they're living. We can visualize what the issue is that they're dealing with. This isn't some obtuse person, somewhere 300 miles away that we can't relate to. And I think what people appreciate in all the engagement that's been discussed in here is they're not a number. When you turn on your favorite news channel, what do you see? You see 250,000 cases, you see, or deaths, you see, millions of cases of this. That we can be anesthetized to that. But when I can call up Danny and have a conversation with him, or I see him in the grocery store, or it's not this way in Castle Pines, but when I was in Frisco, we didn't have mailboxes. We had to go to the post office, and you ran into people in that post office. And when you are no longer a number, because we weren't built that way. Nature didn't intend us to be a number. Nature intended us to be social, interactive human beings that need that human connection. I need to touch somebody. And so I think our ability to do that, and what you're hearing in all the conversation, that in and of itself, if we can say we're doing that, we're successful by definition of doing that. And to the extent that Danny's got some great programs, I'm absolutely jealous. I'm going to be going on your website. I'm going to be calling you later. And we're close behind you on the size. So I think the dynamics of what you're dealing with, but to the extent that we really are focused on that, and to reuse the words, if we are intentional in our thoughts about that, and if those individual engagements are authentic, we will be successful.
That's very well said. Thank you so much. You know, it's interesting. Through our research, we've asked a question about how your trust in your different levels of government have been. And resoundingly, trust in local government has actually increased during this pandemic. And I think it's in large part because of all the things that all of you are saying. You become the go-to place, and you are providing those confident responses to dealing with the fear and just the worriness that people have. So thanks for that. Danny, can you talk about the tools that Dixon is using to help measure feedback from your residents and businesses during this public health emergency?
Yeah, you know, the tools that we're doing that with are the social media and are our human aspect. I mean, customer service has always been a number one goal, connecting, going the extra mile. But if there was like 1% better we could do, we're doing it, right? And so I think what we're seeing when we look at our engagement is the amount of people actually engaging where we're engaging them at. We're meeting people where they're at. You know, I was at an economic development summit last year, and they said, I mean, whether we like it or not as government, there's not going to be a different expectation between what a citizen expects out of a private company and what they expect out of their local government, right? And so that being said, it's really about that connection, that interaction, telling our story, the brand, the way that builds trust. And so our huge component in measurement is how many people are showing up to council meetings now on Zoom, how many people are commenting, how many people are watching, how many people are seeing and interacting with our posts, how many people, when we put something out, call and ask a question and get clarification, how quickly are we able to respond to be able to get back to somebody on the phone or via Zoom, you know. And then I think the biggest factor to measure our effectiveness in our engagement is the very high levels of compliance, kind of in a region where compliance is low. And when you look at all things being even, there's one difference, and that's the leadership, the proactive communication, right? The information sharing that's been happening.
That is super. I'm just writing this down. Thank you. Michael, what tools are you using in Castle Pines to help you measure resident feedback on maintaining this sense of community?
So I would echo Danny's. We have a very high compliance, not just in Castle Pines, but in Douglas County, ranged between kind of 85 and 95%. These are somewhat anecdotal in the sense that we had our health department, you know, wander into various businesses and just do head counts in there. So not scientific by any stretch, but I do think it goes to what Danny said, that early direct communication. What I didn't mention in the last one was we have our mayor put out her mayor's message, and we did that numerous times, especially when it was first happening. And she takes pride. One of her, let me finish that thought. So we saw our number one clicked on item was the mayor's message, to get that very specific, detailed COVID message. And that was intentional and meets everything that Danny spoke of earlier, where we had a consistent message. We had everybody involved saying that same thing. And then our figurehead of our elected mayor was the you know, loud and proud spokesman being out there. And seeing the number of clicks rate relative to anything else gave us a strong indicator that people were appreciating it. Those clicks, those high number of clicks continued for months on end. And she takes great pride in encouraging people to wear masks before our governor told people to wear masks. And it was really, we ordered, can't remember, I think we ordered 10,000 masks when you couldn't get them, when people, you know, were not sure, do they help, do they not help? We held a full day. We handed them out until we were out. and we used a grocery store parking lot, and we handed these masks out on a limited basis so we could get some to all community members who wanted them. And it was those kind of actions, I think, resulting in that compliance that mirrors what Danny said in terms of that is a very strong way that we gauged that level of success relative to COVID specifically. I think a lot of it comes back to if we have good engagement, and it's been said numerous ways and numerous times this morning, but if we are authentic in our communication and if we have good engagement, that level of trust builds within the community. And if we have a high level of trust, however we're engaging, whether that's an event, whether that's a mayor's message, whether that's a council meeting, a citizen interaction with a staff person, whatever that is, the more we build that trust, and we see what you described, Matt. I mean, we have a much higher level of trust at the local level in Colorado than you do at the county or state, and certainly at the federal level. But I think the higher that level of trust is, and that less of accusation when something is said in some fashion or questioning of that, you can take that, again, anecdotal, but you can take that to the bank basically and say, we have done very good engagement. If what you've got is, to use Danny's analogy, you've got, 200 comments and a small portion of those are negative, we're doing a good job. And so I think we are there. We are not where I would ultimately like us to be in terms of the net. I can't use the same numbers Danny does in terms of the number of people in that size community. Our ratio is much smaller, but I think in the ratio we are touching, we do have that high level of trust. And so we're going to take that as a success. And then the challenge for us and the next mountain to climb is how do we get to the next 1,000 people, and how do we make sure that they're engaged into the community to the level that they want to be? Because I think the other thing in this whole question of engagement is not everybody wants to be engaged. If I trust Petula and I trust Danny, government's core job at the end of the day is to make sure I can live my life, that I can take my kid to school, that I know that there's going to be a compassionate, well-trained human being when I dial 911, whether they're dressed in blue or red. And as long as that happens, awesome. Call me if you really need me. But other than that, leave me alone. Let me live my life. And so to the extent that we create that environment, and then as Petula said, there are people who have a need. I spoke to it in the first question, those people who feel isolated, who feel lost, who feel alone, who lost their job, who need money. Castle Pines is an affluent community as it presents itself to the world. But during and currently in the pandemic, we still have a significant, maybe not, I probably shouldn't use that word, but we have some folks within the community that are looking for food and financial assistance. When you put yourself in a high AMI community, those people they don't want to put the yard sign out there that says, I need help, because that doesn't match what the story is that we tell about what this community is. So for us to be able to know that they exist, to be able to reach out, to make that human connection and the fact that we have, I think is another definition of success for us in this community. So again, not perfect, but I think we feel very good about what we've done during the pandemic. And again, has been said many times, we are all learning about this social media. How do we, and I like, what Danny said is, they are not going to come to our platform. They like their platform. So how do we engage with them in a meaningful way on that platform? And how do you have that message out there consistently so that they know that you're there and they can engage with you again if they have that need or desire?
Michael, that was just very well stated. Thanks. The one thing that really resonated with me, and I think everybody has said it in one way or another, is this notion that engagement builds trust. And once you have that higher level of trust, the tools that you use for engagement become kind of moot, because it's just that you've got that connection and you've got that higher level of trust. And so it's implicit that any outreach is positive. And so that's very well stated. Petula, what tools are you using in Augusta for measuring resident feedback?
Well, I'll start with sort of what Danny said, and it's been something that I've lived by, is you have to sort of meet people where they are, and sort of get them to where you want them to be. And sometimes you just sort of stay where they are, because that's just easiest for them. So one of the things that, we look at is sort of return users. How many people are coming to our website and what are they availing themselves of? The increase in participation is I think runs through all of our conversations. How many people are now joining us for commission meeting? How many people now are joining us online for various conversations that we're hosting? And then we do use the back end of Facebook and Instagram and that data to inform, like, when we send things out or what groups we want to target for certain things. And then of course, Google Analytics. So we do use the data because that's very important about how we do our outreach to keep our community engaged. One of the things that I think that Mayor Davis did really well at the beginning of the pandemic, much like what Michael was saying, was, pushing our state government to say, let's wear masks, let's do the things that the CDC is saying to keep our residents safe. And so he, along with a few other mayors here in Georgia, really pushed the envelope with that. Because when you're looking at 203,000 people that you are sort of the caretaker of in a situation like this, he felt that it was his duty to say, well, whatever you do, that's fine, but this is what I need for us to do. And so one of the things that we look at when he does his press conferences around COVID, it's everybody wants to come, the media is always here, but it's how he delivers the message. We got an email the other day from a national organization who wanted to participate in our COVID conversations. And what she said was, thank Mayor Davis sort of for his leadership and his empathy around the situation. If a person on a national level sees that and is not here on a daily basis, think about how the residents that are here think about him on a daily basis. It was, he's going to take care of us, and then he's also going to make sure that we're good. So we closed down when we had to, and then we reopened slowly, but respective of understanding that people needed to work and needed to have their businesses open and all of those things, and then looked at what we could do here in the city to sort of help augment those things. And I think that goes back into why we have return users and why we have increased participation and why our data around Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are growing consistently, because we've had good leadership. And I think that's one of the things that plays for all three of us on this particular Zoom, is that our leaders took our residents into account first. And when you do that and your residents feel that, then kind of like Michael, it's kind of like hands off. We'll just let you do what you need to do because we know that you have our best interest at heart. So, we see the uptick, and I think as we have more and more conversations and we push more and more information out for people to be able to be informed and make educated decisions, we're going to see the increase continue.
This panel has just simply been outstanding. Thanks for all of you to being part of it. As I kind of think about all of the comments that you've shared during the course of this conversation, I think about the human touch, the little things that all of you are doing, the proactive nature of engagement, the relationship that engagement has on building trust and that impact that has on just building that sense of community. All of those kinds of things. I mean, but the technology aspect, obviously everybody's using as well, but Petula, I particularly liked your suggestions on how you reach out to those populations in your community who maybe haven't been engaged in the past. So thanks to all of you for all of the input and perspectives. This is going to be very helpful as we share this with other local government leaders. I would like to just spend a minute or two and offer up the opportunity if any of you have questions for each other. Now would be a good time to ask.
I've got enough. I'll follow up with Danny and Dixon later. I didn't realize we're going to have somebody on a very similar size municipality, so it's great. But I don't have any questions, but both Petula and Danny, I definitely got some great ideas from both of you. Great opportunity to meet both of you as well, and I wish you the best of success, as I do for myself. And as we work our way through. I concur. I think we'll be in this for a little bit longer, but hopefully the light is there at the end of the tunnel, and we're working on our community. The next big push, I think, is going to be around the vaccine and its safety, and it'll be around that messaging, all the same issues we've just spent an hour plus discussing.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Right back at you, my man.
I'm going to, I will, I'm sorry, Petula, go ahead.
No, I echo everything that Michael just said. And I think if we can just, share resources, as we move through all of these different things, and while we come from different communities, our issues are pretty much the same, no matter what size we are. And so, someone's always going to do something better than the other. So the sharing part is the best part about, I think, avenues like this give us that opportunity to meet other people that are doing great work.
We do these panel conversations weekly, and all of the conversations have been great. But I have to say that all of you shared just some great ideas and things that communities and messages that communities should be following, just to build that sense of community in their own environments. I will follow up this conversation with all of the contact information for each of you. And so you'll be able to connect with each other. We'll make it easy for you, Michael, to connect with Annie and Petula. And then I will also follow up with all of the recorded sessions, and so that you'll be able to share this with all of your colleagues. The intent behind this is really to help others benefit from your experiences. I think it's a really important form of leadership to share and to show. And so thanks for sharing it throughout all of your networks once you get them. And then I would love to, and I'll follow up with each of you just to get some feedback on how today went, just so that you can help these panel conversations improve over time. I have found them to be very valuable for me, just in learning the kind of the really creative and successful things that communities are doing during these challenging times. So let me just say thanks to all of you for giving an hour or so of your lives to help other local governments. So with that, unless there's any other follow-up questions, let me just thank you and wish you the best of a holiday season.
Yeah, thank you.
And the same to all of you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep up the great work, guys.